Hey, welcome to Tabletop Skirmish Games. I'm Lee, and in this video we're going to go through how I painted the Warcry catacombs, wooden walkways, small wooden ladder and the wooden plank. In this video I'll go through the paint recipe and process I used and talk about some alternatives and comparison. At the end I'll put links in the description so you can get the paint recipe for free, and also links to all the paints I use with up to 20% discount on the RRP. I'm super excited to get this terrain tabletop ready, so let's get on with it and paint some awesome terrain. To prime the walkways, I used the Army Painter Necrotic Flesh aerosol spray paint. It gave a nice coat and dried pretty quickly. Just to be sure, I left the walkways to dry overnight, but I don't think you have to. It's not so warm in the UK right now, so I made sure to shake the can for at least 2 minutes, as it said on the bottle, and then immersed it in kind of hot water just to warm it up before using it. And in between, every time I used it, I gave it lots more shakes just to be sure. The first coat I used was Wildwood Contrast Paint by Citadel. I just used it right out of the pot and didn't thin it at all. This is quite a dark paint, and for terrain like this, one coat straight from the pot will be just enough. I like the contrast paint for this, as it leaves some nice colours and gives shade to the recesses. It goes on really easy and doesn't pool too much, but if it does start to pool on those raised areas, just work it into the recesses where you want that shadow the most. I find that ending the brush stroke where you want more of the paint is a great way to get it where you want it to be. With that base coat applied, now it was time to give the sharpened pieces of wood and the bindings a different colour. I used snakebite leather contrast paint. This gave a nice contrast to that dark wildwood that I put on earlier. Again, just taking it right from the pot, I was pretty generous about it and just applied it to those edges, working my way into the centre where the two different wood types meet, just so I'd get that extra colour there. I made sure to smooth it out, so as it got nearer the tip there was less paint. I really like this colour, especially for those ropes and bindings. I think it worked really nicely. This piece is my favourite of them all, and I really like the work the contrast paint's done here. That wildwood and snakebite leather look really great together, and I can't wait to use them. Now with those two base coats complete, you can see they've come out pretty good and wouldn't be too far off using just like this if you wanted to. But we can do better, so let's move on to the next stage. Right, now it's time for the first highlight, and this is where we're going to start to bring it to life. I used a Citadel Mournfang Brown layer paint for this, and this will give us just the first gentle highlight. This is a lovely rich paint with a slight red colour, which I thought would look nice and subtle as a complement to the green that will feature heavily in the background of the buildings. Okay, for this first highlight I'm going for a rough dry brush, and I just use an old scruffy synthetic brush for this. I loaded the brush with paint and then removed most of the paint on the paper towel. I didn't use a palette here, as I didn't want to thin the paint down or add any water to it, and I just worked it in the lid to make sure it wasn't all gloopy. Gently flick the brush across that awesome texture and let the terrain piece do the work for me. With so many raised areas and details, it really is a great piece to get this kind of technique worked out on. I did my best to avoid the bindings and sharpen wood pieces, and then that was the first highlight complete. And here we go. I think that turned out really nice, and the reddy brown Mournfang has come through more on those logs than the planks to give a nice subtle contrast between the two wood types. Don't worry about getting anything on those skulls and bones. I'm going to clean those up at the end. Next I wanted to add some very subtle green blobs around the wooden pieces, just to give an idea of damp mouldy wood that would tie in with the buildings. Plague Bearer green contrast did the trick, and I applied it on the edges and where two bits of wood touched or overlapped. You'll hardly see this, but when the final highlight goes on, and then the place is placed nearer on those buildings, it's going to work subtly and tie it all together, making everything belong in the setting. So the final stage now is to highlight with a Shabti bone. I wanted to keep those warm tones coming through, and as this is the same highlight I used on the buildings, we'll get continuity across all the terrain pieces. The same highlight colour will look great on the buildings and the wood, and our eyes won't know the difference. In fact, it'll just tie it all together and make it just look and feel right. Brush against the grain so the raised areas get a hit of that brighter Shabti bone. I'm not being careful to avoid the skulls, because like I said, we're going to paint these later on, and I'll do that with a little white base and then a skeleton horde contrast. With the logs, I made sure to go against the grain again, but on the edges and ends I added more dry brushing to frame the piece. With these logs you could also go up and down instead of just across, as there's lots of texture there to play with. Finally, that small ladder got its turn too, and I covered it all with a dry brush. I imagined that the characters would be walking up and down the ladder rungs, so I added a fair amount there to signify that warm wood and was a bit more rougher in the centre. Now on to the skulls. We just needed to tidy those up. So with some Scar White, I wet that down with a little bit of water on the wet palette, and then I applied the first coat. Once that had dried, you could see it needed another coat, so again watered it down and just covered it all again. With a nice solid base to the skulls and bones, it was time to add our skeleton horde contrast paint. This is going to give us all the shade we need and still allow those highlights to come through. Where this pooled around the base of the skull, it gave a nice recessed shadow thanks to the darker colours underneath, so I wasn't too careful as I applied it, but didn't want it to pool too much. And we could add another highlight here, but for me I'm just going to leave it as it is. And there we go, with the dry brushing and skulls finished, all the pieces were complete. I really like using these paints, and as a beginner I think these terrain pieces were great to work on to learn how to paint them using the dry brushes and the washes. I'll post another video for those barricade pieces that have the more elements in them. I think they're really cool and they deserve a video of their own. I've also done videos for all the other catacomb terrain, so check out the bridges, the doors, the main buildings and that amazing bell tower. They'll all be there showing you how I did that too. I hope this video helps you with your painting. I really love this hobby and it's great fun to work through this catacombs Warcry set, and I'm learning so much about how to paint the terrain and the miniatures, and it's great to be able to share it with you. I'll put a link to my website where you can get the paint recipe for free on my blog post. There'll also be a list there with all the paints I use with links to where you can buy them with up to 20% discount on the RRP. I'll also put those links in the description below. Right, I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for watching. Please like if you like the video, subscribe for more content like this, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to join me next time on Tabletop Skirmish Games.